Hi, I'm Lorraine. My sister said she was taking me somewhere peaceful to recover, but instead, she left me in a rundown care home in a town where no one knew my name and never came back. They thought I wouldn't find out what she did after that she rewrote our father's will, sold our house, and told everyone I was too unstable to be included. But when I rolled into that courtroom, alive, awake, and holding the truth, she fainted. How does someone go from being the one who held the family together to the one they tried to erase? And why do they only call it betrayal once you're too broken to fight back? I remember the smell first: plastic, heated leather, some kind of citrus air freshener that never quite masked the scent of hospital-grade cleaning spray. It clung to the corners of my memory like cobwebs. That scent was the last thing I registered before everything in my life was divided into before and after. I'd left work a little later than usual. My back ached from sitting too long, my shoulders sore from lifting Mom into bed the night before. It had been a long week, and the weekend offered no relief in sight. Verna said she couldn't help because of her anxiety, but she had time to post selfies from brunch and argue with strangers online about politics. I said nothing. Again. I was driving through the outskirts of Springfield, headed home to microwave leftovers and remind Mom to take her pills. I was adjusting the podcast volume, something about estate fraud, ironically, when the truck came out of nowhere. No screech, no horn, just the sudden, brutal force of metal folding inward. Blackness. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. Everything ached, my legs didn't move. The ceiling had those old drop tiles, one of them stained yellow in the corner. I stared at it too long. That's when I heard her voice. "There you are," Verna said, breezy like she'd just found me wandering the produce aisle. She leaned over me, her tone too cheerful. "Scared the crap out of us. But you're okay now. You're in good hands. I'll take care of everything, don't worry." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I was in no shape to argue. In the days that followed, maybe it was weeks, maybe just a blur of drugs and beeping monitors, Verna was always there. But she was never really there. She sat beside me, phone in hand, fake concern face plastered on any time someone important walked in. To the nurses, she was the attentive sister. To me, she was a stranger rehearsing a role. Eventually, she said she'd found a place, a quiet facility, out of town, where I could recover without all the noise and stress of the city. "I think it'll be good for you," she said, smiling too wide. "Just for a little while." I wasn't in a place to push back. She handled the discharge papers, the arrangements, the transport. I was wheeled out of that hospital and into a private van like cargo. The ride was long, longer than she'd said it would be. Fields gave way to cracked pavement, chain-link fences, boarded-up storefronts. She talked the whole time, but I barely registered her words. Something about starting fresh, time to rest, letting go. When the van finally stopped, I looked up at the sign, LaSalle Rest and Recovery. It was small, unimpressive, a gray building with chipped paint and a gravel driveway. "We're here," she chirped, popping the back of the van open. "I'll help get you settled, then I'll come back tomorrow with some of your things." That was the last time I saw Verna in person. Inside, a nurse handed me a clipboard and offered a weary smile. The room they put me in smelled like mildew and boiled potatoes. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners. There was one window, sealed shut. I asked about Wi-Fi. The nurse raised an eyebrow and handed me a landline phone with a disconnected dial tone. The wheelchair wasn't mine. It didn't fit. My shoulders rubbed the sides, and one brake didn't work. They said it was the best they had. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the parking lot lights flicker, a different nurse stopped by. "Do you want us to call someone for you?" she asked gently. I stared out the window. "No. My sister's coming back tomorrow," she nodded, probably not believing me. I didn't believe me either. My duffel bag was half zipped on the floor, one sweater, a toothbrush, and a pack of tissues. No charger, no ID, no wallet, I had nothing. The nurse turned off the light and closed the door with a soft click. I stared at the cracked ceiling, the hum of the old radiator pulsing behind me. "You really left me here, didn't you, Verna?" I whispered. The next morning, I was still staring at the ceiling when a cart rolled past my room. I heard the soft clink of china, someone getting their morning tea with real mugs instead of paper cups. The nurse who brought it greeted someone down the hall with a bright, "Your daughter's here! Look at that smile!" I didn't bother looking, but I listened. I always listened. The voice that responded was high-pitched, maybe mid-30s, too cheerful for someone visiting a facility like this. "Hi, Mom, I brought you those lemon cookies you like. And I talked to the doctor. He said you've been doing great." I closed my eyes. It's strange how hearing a kindness meant for someone else can scrape something raw in you. I wasn't jealous exactly. But I couldn't stop my mind from counting all the times I'd brought something for Mom, and Verna had shown up empty-handed, unless you counted excuses. Once, she'd told me she couldn't help pay for Dad's oxygen tanks because she had emotional labor burnout. But somehow, that same week, she managed to afford floor seats at a basketball game. When I confronted her, she just blinked and said, "You're the one who always needs to be in control, Lorraine. Why not own it?" The way she said it, like generosity was just a symptom of my ego, stuck in my ribs. After Dad's diagnosis, she moved back in under the pretense of helping out. But within days, I realized help meant watching TV on the couch while I drove back and forth between two jobs. I worked admin at a dentist's office from 8 to 2, and then managed inventory at a supply warehouse until close. Meanwhile, Verna told people she was our emotional anchor. Once, I overheard her telling a neighbor, "Lorraine's better with logistics. I'm better at the soft stuff." Yeah, like draining bank accounts with emotional overdrafts. The moment that never left me was when she asked to borrow $50 for groceries. I transferred it to her account before she finished the sentence. That Friday, I saw her tagged in a photo online. Concert lights, plastic beer cup in hand, flashing a peace sign in a band tee I'd seen her wear exactly once. "Grocery shopping went well?" I texted. She never replied. But 2 days later, she posted a quote on social media. "Some people only give to throw it in your face." I didn't say a word. Not then. I was the one who made sure Dad got to every cardiology appointment. I tracked every dosage, every test result. When he passed away, it was me who picked out the casket, reviewed the invoice, coordinated with the funeral home. Verna arrived 15 minutes before the service began, wearing dramatic sunglasses and a silk scarf like she was channeling some vintage movie star. She hugged me just long enough for the cameras, then walked to the front and gave a eulogy that opened with, "Dad and I were always close, in a quiet kind of way." Quiet, sure, if you define close as skipping holidays and texting on birthdays 2 days late. After the service, while I dealt with the paperwork and funeral home payments, $11,000 all out of my account, she drifted off with some second cousin to grab a drink and decompress. Not one person said thank you. Not for the arrangements. Not for covering costs. Not for being the one who showed up every day, even when it hurt. I guess I shouldn't have expected it. But part of me did. I wheeled myself over to the window in the care home, adjusting slightly to catch the light. Across the courtyard, I watched the same visitor from this morning laughing with her mother. They had matching cardigans, one blue, one red, and their hands mirrored each other as they sipped tea. No one had ever matched me like that. Verna used to say I had eldest daughter syndrome, even though I was younger. "You act like the weight of the world is yours to carry," she once muttered during an argument. "That's not noble. It's exhausting." She wasn't wrong. But she also wasn't the one holding anything. Looking back now, it's hard to tell when I stopped being a sister and became something else. The errand runner, the emergency contact, the ATM. Maybe that's why it was so easy for her to leave me here. A nurse passed by and gave me a smile I didn't return. I shifted in the wheelchair, feeling how the armrest still dug into my ribs. I had a red patch on my hip from how poorly it fit. I'd mentioned it to someone days ago. Nothing had changed. Back then, I would have fixed it myself, driven to the medical supply store, measured the dimensions, made it right. But here, I wasn't in charge. Here, I was just waiting. The overhead intercom buzzed. Lunch trays are being delivered to rooms. Please remain seated. I stayed by the window. A thought flickered. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but it asked to exist. I turned and slowly rolled toward the nurse's desk. "Can I borrow a pen and some paper?" I asked, voice even. The nurse looked up, surprised. "Sure, hun. Anything you need to write down?" I took the pen without answering. Back in my room, I unfolded the page. I didn't know why I was writing, but it felt like the only thing I could still choose. She thought I would stay quiet forever. She was wrong. It didn't happen all at once. People like Verna don't lose your trust in a single moment. They chip away at it. They poke holes in your dignity so slowly, you mistake it for weathering. But I see it now. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It came wrapped in receipts and smiles. A few weeks after the accident, when the bruises had faded and I could sit up without help, Verna started showing up with folders. Manila envelopes, meticulously labeled. "Just some billing stuff," she'd say while flipping through them. "Forms for reimbursement, mileage logs, for caregiving." At first, I didn't question it. My body was still uncooperative, and frankly, I was too exhausted to read through itemized statements. But her tone started changing, subtle at first. Phrases like, "I've spent so much time here," or, "I've put everything else on hold for this, right?" Followed by, "You wouldn't want me to go under just because I'm helping you." Then came the checks. She'd sit on the edge of the bed, smooth out a form, and hand me a pen I could barely grip. "This one's for the wheelchair adjustment," she said one afternoon. "And this one's for the transportation to your last appointment. You remember, right?" I didn't, but I signed. She leaned in close that time, not even trying to hide the irritation in her voice. "You know this is costing me, right?" That night, when I pretended to sleep, I heard her pacing outside the door. I caught snippets of a phone call. "No, she doesn't say much. Yeah, basically I'm her only support. Of course I should be compensated. Who else is doing anything for her?" I lay still, heat building in my throat. The next morning, I asked about my laptop. "Oh," she said, eyes darting away. "I gave it away. You weren't using it. Someone else needed it more." I asked for my bank card. She said she'd consolidated everything into one account, for simplicity. "You had too many loose ends," she added, like I was a messy drawer she'd finally organized. I tried logging into my accounts. Passwords had been changed. The phone she gave me had no service, no apps, nothing but a contacts list with her name and the main line to the care facility. When I asked about it, she waved her hand. "Lorraine, don't get paranoid. I'm just trying to help. Trust is a two-way street." A phrase that only ever gets used when someone's already violated it. That night, I wrote down every account number I could remember, scribbled on napkins, corner pages of a takeout menu, a used envelope I found in the common area. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That was the night I realized Verna didn't think of herself as my sister anymore. She thought of herself as my manager. She started spacing out her visits after that. At first, she came every few days, then once a week. Eventually, she just called in to check. That's when I knew something had shifted. She didn't need to play the role anymore. The papers were signed. The money had moved. I was no longer a risk. I was a resolved asset. Back in the present, I folded the pages I'd written and slid them into the spine of a book on the shelf near my bed. It was a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, left behind by another resident. Seemed fitting. The next day, the nurse poked her head in after lunch. "No call again?" she said softly. "Want us to follow up?" I shook my head. "No. She's exactly where she wants to be." After she left, I sat alone for a while, watched the tree branches sway beyond the glass. At some point, I reached for the drawer and pulled out the notes again. This time, I didn't just look at them. I added to them, line by line. Anything I remembered, any document, any pin, any date. I wasn't planning a war, I was reclaiming my name. And it started with refusing to let someone else speak it for me. The envelope was old, but the ink on the signature had never faded. I took it out gently, smoothing the crumpled edges with my palm. It had been hidden behind a stack of worn blankets and two unopened puzzle boxes someone had donated years ago. Funny how the things that matter most end up wedged behind things no one wants. I placed it on my lap, stared at it for a moment, then tucked it under my pillow. I wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I wheeled myself into the hallway and stopped at the lounge where sunlight poured through the windows, warming the floor tiles. There was a woman sitting by the fireplace, probably in her 70s, talking to a hospice volunteer in a blue fleece jacket. Their voices were soft, unremarkable. I wasn't listening until I heard the word Whitlow. My head turned before I could stop myself. "She passed a few months ago," the volunteer said. "Lovely woman, very gentle. Her daughter set up a beautiful service. Small, tasteful, just family." My lungs stopped. It was like someone had poured cold water down the back of my neck. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Who passed?" The volunteer turned to me with a kind expression that made everything worse. "Oh, your mother, dear. I assumed you knew. Verna, right? She said you two were distant." "Distant," I repeated, like the word had just been invented. She nodded quickly, already regretting saying anything. "I'm so sorry. I thought you'd been informed." I didn't respond. I just turned away and rolled back toward my room, moving faster than usual, ignoring the squeaky wheel on the right side. Inside, I shut the door softly, then stared at my reflection in the dark window. My hands had started shaking again. I tucked them under the blanket. Verna buried our mother without telling me. The woman who nursed me through chickenpox, who taught me how to sew a button back on when I was 12, who once stayed up all night holding me during a thunderstorm. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to see her face one last time. Didn't get to touch her hand. Didn't get to speak at her service. My name, my role, my existence. Scrubbed clean like a smudge on glass. And Verna? She staged a performance, called it family only. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the building creak. Around 3 a.m, I pulled the envelope from under my pillow and held it to my chest, but still didn't open it. The next morning, a nurse came in to bring medication. She hesitated at the foot of my bed. "I saw something you might want to look at," she said, placing a printed magazine on my nightstand. "Page 14. After she left, I flipped it open with numb fingers. There it was, a full-page feature in Heartland Neighbors magazine. The title, Verna Whitlow, the daughter who gave it all. The photo showed her standing in front of our childhood home, the front porch decorated with mums and a wreath. In her arms was a wooden urn. I had to look twice to recognize it as my mother's. The article was a collection of flattering quotes. Verna never left her mother's side. She managed everything with grace. "Some daughters are just built differently," I snorted. She was built differently. Verna was built to polish the parts of herself that people liked and hide the ones they didn't. And she was good at it. Good enough to erase me from the entire narrative. The last paragraph was the worst. She declined to speak much about her estranged sister, simply saying, "We all cope differently." Estranged, not gone, not missing, not recovering in a facility Verna picked and abandoned me in. Just distant, as if I'd chosen it. I folded the magazine shut and stared at the photo for a long time, before tearing the page in half, clean, down the center. But I didn't throw it away. I kept the photo, slid it under my pillow next to the envelope. Later that day, I sat by the window again. Across the courtyard, the same mother and daughter, who always visited together, were planting a few daffodils in small pots. They laughed about something. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell they were real. I watched them a while, then whispered, If I disappeared, the world would keep turning. But if I speak, maybe it won't. That night, I wheeled over to the cabinet and pulled out the pouch again. My fingers found the seal, brittle but still intact. I opened it. Inside was my father's original will. Signed, dated, notarized. My name listed first. She wouldn't wait long to retaliate. Verna never gave warnings. She gave orders. The will sat on my lap, crisp and yellowed with age, but untouched by time in the places that mattered. My name, first, middle, last, typed clearly under primary beneficiary. The assets were straightforward. The house, a modest savings account, and the small retirement fund my father had quietly built over 30 years at the steel plant. No mention of Verna, not even as secondary. I stared at it for a long while, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't imagined my role in that house, in that family. I'd been erased on purpose. That evening, I waited until the common area cleared out and wheeled myself to the library nook near the end of the corridor. The facility only had one public-use computer. It was old, the kind with a sticky keyboard and a monitor that took a minute to warm up. But it worked. I didn't need the internet for anything fancy. I just needed a name. A single name I'd tucked into the back of my memory almost 10 years ago. Gerald Haskins. He was the estate attorney my father used for years. I remembered seeing his business card once when helping Dad sort his tax documents. He had a practice in Springfield, just a few blocks from where I used to work. I typed slowly, clumsily, using the on-screen keyboard because the real one was missing 2 letters. It took longer than it should have, but eventually I found an email address. I took the will to the front office and asked to use their outdated fax machine. The receptionist gave me a puzzled look, but didn't stop me. I attached a short message. Mr. Haskins, this is Lorraine Kepler. I believe I've been removed from a life I was supposed to inherit. Attached is the original will of my father, Thomas Kepler. I found it recently, and I need to know if it's valid. Please advise. I do not have a phone. Email is best. Lorraine. I went back to my room and waited. There was no confirmation, no ding, no chime, just silence and my own breathing. By nightfall, the building had gone quiet. I sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker off across the courtyard. Then, the call came. The facility phone on the wall rang twice before the nurse answered it. She turned toward me, mouth tight. It's your sister. I didn't hesitate. Put her through. The cordless handset felt heavier than I remembered. Lorraine, Verna began, voice soft and syrupy. Hey, just wanted to check in. Everything okay? I let the pause hang in the air. Actually, I said, things are finally starting to be. There was silence on her end. Then a shift in tone, less concerned, more alert. You haven't done anything reckless, have you? I stared out the window. Would it make a difference if I had? Another silence, this one taut and unmistakable. You know this doesn't have to get ugly. It already is, I replied flatly. She hung up. I didn't slam the phone back onto the hook. I didn't raise my voice or clench my fists. I simply lowered the receiver, folded my hands in my lap, and breathed. That was her warning. She had no idea I just gave mine. The next morning, the receptionist stopped by my door. Someone named Haskins emailed you back, she said. Wants to know if you can come in or do a phone consult. I asked her to print the message. It was brief, professional. He confirmed the will looked legitimate and asked if I had the physical copy in my possession. I replied immediately, yes, I want to meet. That afternoon, I asked Silas, the only person in this place who seemed to see me without pity, if he had a car. He did. I need a ride to Springfield, I said. It's time someone heard my side of things. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. I'll fill the tank. You cover the truth, he said with a wink. I packed the will in a protective folder. No fluff, no makeup. Just my name, my story, And the truth, sealed in a manila envelope I now held like a torch. The drive to Springfield took just under 2 hours. Silas kept the windows cracked and the radio low, classical piano drifting in and out like the breeze. He didn't press me for details. That was the thing about Silas. He gave space without making it feel like distance. When we pulled into the parking lot of Haskins and Weller, a modest 2-story office building wedged between an insurance agency and an old diner, I checked my reflection in the sun visor. No makeup, hair pulled back tight, lips dry. I looked tired, but clear-eyed. I needed nothing more. Inside, the receptionist barely glanced up before motioning us toward the elevator. "Second floor, room 204, she said. "He's expecting you." Silas waited outside in the hallway, and I rolled into the room alone. Gerald Haskins looked older than I remembered. Thinner, with a jaw that seemed permanently set like he'd just been handed bad news. But his eyes were sharp, and when he saw me, something flickered behind them. Recognition, maybe guilt. "Lorraine Kepler," he said, standing. "I wasn't sure you'd show up in person." "I needed to look someone in the eye," I replied, placing the envelope on the table between us. He didn't touch it. "I've already reviewed the scanned copy. It's authentic, filed under your father's account. I verified the notary's signature myself." I nodded once. "Then why am I not in the current estate records?" He hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "Because someone else filed a new version, about 6 months ago." I expected that. Still stung. "Verna?" I asked, though I already knew. "She claimed you were no longer capable of managing affairs, submitted a doctor's letter, unsigned, and said the original will had been misplaced." "Misplaced," I repeated dryly. "She also claimed she was the only family member involved in end-of-life care." "Of course she did." "She's currently filing a motion to secure the estate, claims there's instability on your end. She's working with another firm now, her own attorney." That's when I laughed. It came out clipped and humorless. "So she's trying to claim the house, the account, and rewrite the story while she's at it." Mr. Haskins didn't respond. "Can we stop her?" "Yes. But you'll need to contest her filing and present this." He tapped the envelope. "Done." He looked surprised. "You want to move that fast?" "She moved first. I'm just showing up." Later that afternoon, we arranged for a meeting with the court's preliminary hearing officer. Gerald said he'd call to expedite the process. Before I left his office, I handed him a flash drive. He tilted his head. "What's this?" "An audio file, my mother, recorded 3 days before she died." He took it without asking how I'd gotten it. I appreciated that. The next scheduled court appearance was in 10 days. But Verna didn't wait that long to make her move. 2 weeks later, we returned for the initial hearing prep. This time, I didn't just sit in silence. We walked into the lawyer's office, Silas steadying my chair with one hand while balancing 2 coffees in the other. Inside, I heard her voice before I saw her. "She's not in a state to manage a legal process," Verna was saying. "Emotionally compromised, physically limited, and frankly, unstable since the accident. I'm only trying to ensure the assets don't fall into disarray." The lawyer she spoke to was young, probably 10 years her junior, and looked more confused than convinced. He opened his mouth to reply, but I beat him to it. "Good thing I'm not dead then." Verna turned, startled. I rolled forward. "And very much not insane." Her face lost color. How did?" "Surprise," I said, resting the envelope on the table. "Turns out I still exist." The lawyer blinked at both of us, clearly unsure whose client he even belonged to. Verna recovered quickly, eyes narrowing. "This isn't going to work, Lorraine. Nobody is going to believe—" I cut her off. "You used our mother's funeral to erase me. You used your own lies to steal from a woman who couldn't walk. But sure, tell me more about what people will believe." The room stayed quiet. Even Silas stood still. I pulled out the flash drive. "Before you file anything else, maybe listen to Mom's voice first. I handed it to the young attorney. She says my name, full, clear, says I took care of her, that I was her strength, says to protect me, because she knew what was coming. Verna's voice cracked. How dare you use that? That recording isn't legal. I turned to her. That voice raised us. The least it can do is stop you. The lawyer turned to Verna. We'll need to delay filing your motion. Her lips curled. You always did know how to stage a scene. No, I said, standing, or rather, sitting, taller. I just stopped letting you write the script. As we left the building, she followed me into the hallway. You think this changes anything? I didn't answer. Verna stepped closer. You're still a nobody in a wheelchair. You think a folder of paper and some old voice memo gives you value? I met her eyes. Calm, steady. If that's true, I said, then why are you shaking? She didn't reply. Just stood there. I reached into my bag and handed her a court document, folded but pristine. See you in front of the judge. Verna didn't say a word as I handed her the court notice. She took it stiffly, eyes scanning the paper, but not really reading it. Her fingers were trembling, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel smaller than her. I felt steady. 10 days later, we were in the courthouse. The building was old. Oak benches, creaky floors, the faint scent of dust and lemon polish clinging to everything. Silas and I arrived early. I wore a dark green blouse and simple black slacks, my chair newly cleaned and adjusted. I'd asked the nurse at the care center to braid my hair back the night before. Nothing dramatic, just clean, clear, present. Verna was already inside when we entered the probate courtroom. She stood near the front, surrounded by 3 women I recognized from a church flyer she'd once posted on Facebook, women who had no idea what they were standing next to. She was dressed in soft beige, with her hair styled tight, carrying a sleek leather folio, like she was heading to a charity board meeting instead of a courtroom. At first, no one noticed me. I was just another person being pushed into a space by a companion. But then I wheeled myself forward. The moment I opened my folder and placed the original will on the clerk's table, heads turned. The judge adjusted his glasses. Ms. Kepler, we weren't expecting your physical presence today. I looked him square in the eye. Which is exactly why I'm here. Verna's mouth dropped slightly, then snapped shut like a trap being set. I didn't look at her. Not yet. The hearing began. Mr. Haskins presented the will, the verification from the notary, and a copy of my father's estate documents. Then he played the audio clip, Mom's voice filling the room, gentle but certain. If anything happens to me, you protect Lorraine. She's the only reason I held on this long. The courtroom was silent. Verna's lawyer, young, overeager, attempted to object, claiming the recording was inadmissible. The judge raised a hand, dismissing the protest with practiced calm. Then he turned to me. Ms. Kepler, is there anything you'd like to say before I issue preliminary ruling? I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't rehearse anything, but the words came out smooth. I don't want her to apologize, I said. I don't need her to explain. I just want her to know one thing. I turned, locking eyes with Verna. You will never set foot in that house again. Not because I claimed it back, but because it was never yours to begin with. You could hear a pin drop. One of the women beside Verna shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced away. Even the clerk stopped scribbling for a second. Verna went pale. The kind of pale that starts at the throat and climbs to the cheeks. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't have a line prepared. The judge nodded slowly. Motion to secure the estate under contested claim is denied. We will proceed with full review based on this newly presented documentation. Temporary hold on transfers. Both parties will be notified of the formal hearing date. The gavel struck once. It was done. For now. Outside the courtroom, the air felt heavier. Verna walked ahead of her little entourage, no longer speaking. She made it as far as the stairs before her knees buckled. A gasp rippled through the group. One of her friends grabbed her elbow. Verna collapsed onto the bottom step, eyes glazed. Someone called for an ambulance, but no one rushed to hold her hand. Silas stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "You all right?" he asked gently. I exhaled through my nose. "I'm not shaking, that's new." We waited until the paramedics arrived. Verna refused the stretcher, pride, even now. She sat in silence while the EMTs checked her vitals. I didn't approach. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to exist, loudly, legally, undeniably. As we rolled back toward the parking lot, Silas reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder. "They want you to speak," he said, placing it on my lap. I looked at him. "At the upcoming community hearing," he added, "on elder care abuse. Someone from the committee heard about your case, said your voice might matter." It took me a second to answer. "They want me to speak," I repeated. He nodded. "This time, for yourself." I sat with the folder in my lap the entire drive back to LaSalle. The courthouse behind us, the road ahead silent and open. Silas didn't say much. He never did, unless it mattered. The weight of what had just happened still hadn't fully landed. Maybe it wouldn't until I walked through the door of the house again. 1 week later, we returned to Springfield. Not for court this time, for something else entirely. The front lawn of the old house had gone wild. Grass up past the ankles, weeds curling over the sidewalk. I sat in the car a moment longer, staring at the porch light fixture that hadn't worked since 2014. Still crooked. Still there. Silas stepped around to my side and opened the door. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm sure." He rolled me up the ramp we'd installed years ago for Mom, and I reached into my bag. The key felt warm from my palm. I placed it on the kitchen table the moment we were inside. "No more locks," I said. He glanced at me. "You want it open to the world?" "Not the world," I replied. "Just the people who need something like this." We started cleaning that day. It wasn't glamorous. It was dust and cobwebs and the occasional dead mouse. But as we moved through the rooms, Mom's bedroom, the sunroom, the basement, I didn't feel haunted. I felt grounded. We didn't change everything. Some wallpaper stayed. The creaky stairs remained. But I bought paint. I picked new light fixtures. We updated the plumbing. The city sent a few permits after a local contractor vouched for us. Turns out kindness goes a long way when you're not asking for much. A week into renovations, Silas brought in an old blueprint spread across a folding table in what used to be the dining room. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. He laid it out carefully, brushing crumbs from his sleeve. The drawing wasn't fancy. Pencil lines, scribbled notes. But it was a layout for a recovery center. Adaptable rooms, therapy space, shared kitchen. "I had it made years ago," he said. "Back when I thought I'd turn my dad's place into something similar." I looked up. "Why didn't you?" He smiled without warmth. "My brother had other plans. I didn't have the will to fight him. And then, I figured maybe I didn't deserve it either." I touched the corner of the paper. "You do." He shook his head. "You do now? And this might be what you make with what she tried to steal from you." That night, he handed me an envelope. Inside, a check. "I sold some land I had. It wasn't doing anything but sitting there. Use this to start what you wished you had when you were on your own." I didn't cry. I just folded the paper, placed it in the folder with the rest of the permits, and whispered, "Thank you." 3 weeks later, the sign went up. Hearthlight House. Support and restoration for the overlooked. We had a soft opening. Nothing fancy. No ribbon cutting. No press release. Just a note on the door that said, "If you've been forgotten, overlooked, or discarded, we see you. We're here." The first person to knock was a young woman named Elise, mid-20s, quiet, withdrawn. She'd been in a car accident last year and hadn't heard from her parents since they learned she might not walk again. She barely spoke when I answered the door. Just held up the flyer we'd posted at the clinic downtown and asked, "Is this place real?" I moved aside. "Come in. We don't do questions here. We do rebuilding." She crossed the threshold with hesitance, but she didn't look back. Later that night, I sat alone in what used to be the den, now repainted and refurnished. A small wooden drawer on the side table caught my eye. Inside was an envelope, cream-colored, handwritten. My name. It was from Verna. I didn't open it, but I didn't throw it away either. I didn't open the letter the next day, or the one after that. It stayed in the drawer, exactly where I left it, beneath a stack of intake forms and volunteer schedules. At some point, I slid it into a manila folder and labeled it, Archive Family Matters. Silas saw the label and raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to file it." "You don't always need closure from the person who broke you," I said. "Sometimes it comes from what you build after." He didn't argue. A week passed. Hearthlight started to find its rhythm. We weren't full, not even close, but that was never the point. It wasn't about numbers. It was about space, dignity, belonging. Elise, the young woman who'd arrived on opening day, had started showing up to the backyard garden every afternoon. At first, she just sat, arms crossed, shoulders up, face guarded. But this week, I noticed her kneeling by one of the raised beds, loosening soil with her fingers. That evening, I rolled outside as the sun dipped behind the trees. The light made everything soft. Edges of buildings, people, even memory. Elise was crouched near a plastic tray filled with seedlings. Marigolds, zinnias, something else I couldn't name. "What kind are those?" I asked. She looked up, a little surprised I'd spoken. "Ones that don't give up easy," I smiled at that. "Those are the best kind." She didn't say much after that, but she didn't leave either. I stayed beside her, letting the silence stretch. Not uncomfortable, just full. "I used to think everything had to be healed," I said eventually. "Every crack filled, every scar faded. Now I think some wounds just need a purpose." She nodded once, still focused on the soil. Back inside, I passed Silas on his way to the front door. He was carrying a box of supplies from the hardware store. "Need help?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope, just going to finish the trim in the east room." "How's your shoulder?" "Hurts like hell," he muttered, then smiled. "But worth it." We both laughed quietly, then went our separate ways. Later that evening, after everyone had eaten and the common rooms had gone quiet, I sat near the fireplace. The light flickered against the windows. Outside, it had started to drizzle. That's when I saw it. Through the fogged glass of the front door, a silhouette stood under the street lamp across the road. Still, watching. I didn't have to guess who it was. Verna. She didn't move toward the door. She didn't wave. She just stood there for a while, then turned and walked away, leaving something small on the welcome mat. I waited a few minutes before opening the door. There, in the soft glow of the porch light, sat a paper bag with a single potted plant inside. A small tag was tied to its stem, but it was blank. No message, no name. I picked it up carefully and carried it to the mantel above the fireplace. The pot was chipped. The soil was dry. But the plant, whatever it was, still had color, still held on. I didn't cry. I didn't forgive her. But I didn't hate her either. Some houses burned down. Others rebuild into something better. Mine grew roots.